අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට කියන්නේ අපි ඉන්නේ මේ පශ්චාත් යනාතිජිත සමයක කියලා. නමුත් මේ සිද්ධ වෙන අපි මේ යන ක්‍රියාවලියනොත් එක්ක මෙච්චර කාලයක් තිස්සේ රටේ පාලකයෝ ගත තීරණත් එක්ක ගොඩක් හැරිලා බලුවහම අපි අපව ප්‍රශ්න කරන්න ඕනේ යනාතිජිතකරණය ඇත්තටම ඉවරද නැත්නම් ඒක අපි මේ දැනටත් අත්විඳින්මින් පවතින මේ වර්තමානයේ අත්විඳින්මින් යන සිද්ධියක් කියන එක. විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ ආපු හැම කලින් හැම රජයක්ම හැම ආණ්ඩුවක්ම වගේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ආර්ථිකයේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ මිනිස්සු ජීවත් වෙන විදිහට මේ හැම දෙයකම ව්‍යුහාත්මක වෙනස්කම් තමයි කරේ. ඒ ව්‍යුහාත්මක වෙනස්කම් කරේ ගෝලීය ආර්ථිකයට ගැළපෙන විදිහට. නැත්නම් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ අපේ භූමියනවත් අපේ මිනිස්සුන්ගේ සිතුම් පැතුම් වලවත් අපේ මේ අතිශය විවිධත්වයෙන් යුතු අපේ වෛවර්ණ ජීවන රටාවන් වලට ගැළපෙන දේවල් නෙමෙයි. ඒවට විරුද්ධව මිනිස්සු හඬ නගද්දි මිනිස්සු කතා කරද්දි ඒ හඬ පාලනය කරන්න, ඒ හඬ මර්ධනය කරන්න තමයි ත්‍රස්තවාදී වැළැක්වීමේ කනක් වගේ කන පාවිච්චි වුනේ. අද මම ආරාධනා කරන ඊගවට අදහස් දක්වන්න ස්වස්තික ආරුලිංගම් සහෝදරියට දිගු කාලයක් තිස්සේ රාජ්‍ය මර්ධනයට විරුද්ධව සටන් කරපු විශේෂයෙන්ම අරගලයේදී අත්අඩංගුවටපත් වෙච්ච ඒ හරහා මර්ධනයට පත් වෙච්ච ක්‍රියාකාරීන් වෙනුවෙන් ගොඩක් කැපවීම කරලා කටයුතු කරපු සහෝදරයා ස්වස්තික ආරුලිංගම්.
I thought I'll, dear friends and comrades, I thought I'll translate something which Rajiv Khan said in Tamil, which I think is important for others to hear as well. There was a political prisoner called Muttaya Sahadevan. He was an ordinary coolie person. His job was to cut tree branches. That was his job. And he was arrested at the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was arrested because he was a Tamil at a time when the government was constructing all Tamils as terrorists. And he was arrested and he was kept in detention for over 10 years and he died in prison. So when MP Nanekara, Mr. Nanekara, comes to a press briefing and says, there are no political prisoners, then the question needs to be asked. For nearly 30 years, when Tamils were arrested, constructed as terrorists and arrested, was that not political? Soon after the Easter Sunday attack, when 2,000 Muslims were arrested, constructed as terrorists and arrested, was that not political? So when you arrest someone under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, it in itself is a political act, because the Prevention of Terrorism Act in this country and in several other countries have been used to construct communities as terrorists. So that is first. Secondly, there is a story which is going around now. And recently also someone said this. They said that, no, let's get rid of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Let's get rid of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Let's not fight over what is going to come after. So the argument is, let's repeal the PTA, but let's not fight over it, because otherwise we will never get rid of the PTA. That's the argument. This is a strange argument to me. Because it's like saying, let's get rid of an old slavery law and in its place, let's pass a new slavery law. And this argument is even more strange. And I want to repeat this, I want to perhaps publicly state this personal and political story of how myself and another lawyer, Lakmani Hemachandra, who is now sitting member of parliament, together constructed an argument that in a country like Sri Lanka, we do not need anti-terror laws. You remember in 2015, the Yapania government came to power promising the repeal of the PTA. In 2017, they suddenly brought a draft called the Counter-Terror Act. And unfortunately, many civil society actors were telling us that this draft is a good draft because it is better than the Prevention of Terrorism Act. When I went through the draft and when Member of Parliament Lakmali Hemachandra went through the draft, we realized it is PTA in a new form. So we sat together and we constructed an argument that in a country like Sri Lanka, we do not need counter-terror laws. Afterwards, we went and met Dr. Harini Amarasuriya and we went and met Member of Parliament, Mr. Bimal Ratnayaka, and both agreed that in Sri Lanka, we do not need any anti-terror laws in this country. Ms. Hemachandra, Mr. Ratnayaka, and Dr. Harini Amarasuriya are sitting in Parliament today. So now since they are in power, they cannot now change their position, can they? But the government is dragging its foot on whether they want to repeal the PTA, whether they want to amend the PTA, and whether they want to bring a new anti-terror legislation in its place. It is not a point of debate for us. Whether we need to get rid of the PTA and in its place bring another counter-terror legislation. It's not a point of debate for us because, as I said, it's like saying get rid of the old slavery law and in its place bring a new slavery law. It is also not a point of debate that you can pass an anti-terror legislation which protects human rights. There is nothing called an anti-terror legislation which can protect human rights because anti-terror legislations are premised on three principles. One is to allow the executive to take away the right of liberty from an individual as long as possible. Whatever may be, whether it be the ATA, whether it be the CTA, whether it be the PTA, in all three legislation, to take away the right of liberty of an individual has been one of the underlying premise of that legislation. Secondly, placing the executive above the judication or above the judiciary. Placing the executive above the judiciary. And the argument which people have put forward and which is accepted is that in a time of emergency, you can't rely on a judiciary to act very fast. But in this country, we have over 100 magistrates who open their doors at even 12 o'clock at midnight. So in a country like Sri Lanka, when we have such a flexible lower judiciary, that argument does not hold. As opposed to, there is only one executive, as opposed to 100 magistrates sitting. If the police wants, they can in fact get orders to arrest people if they want. So that argument does not hold. Executive is placed over the judiciary. And the third argument is evidence. Counter-terror legislation as opposed to ordinary legislations find in its structure to reverse the burden of proof on the suspect so that the moment you get arrested under an anti-terror legislation, you become a terrorist. The moment you are arrested under an anti-terror legislation, you become a terrorist. And then you have to go to court to prove that you are in fact not a terrorist. That is the difference between ordinary criminal law and counter-terror legislation. So we are here as People's Council. We are here to ask the government to repeal the PTA, but we are also here to ask the government to not make the mistake which the Yahapalli government made, which previous government made, where they brought another legislation to replace the PTA. Because you cannot have a good or an anti-terror law which respects human rights. That doesn't exist in this world. So we ask this government to repeal the PTA and put a full stop there and not to pass any other anti-terror law. The last thing which I want to say is another argument which they are now bringing forward is that tell me one country which doesn't have an anti-terror law. For that, the simple response which I want to give is that there is a genocide which is happening in Palestine, and the United States, the European Union, the entire Western hegemony is backing this genocide, so much so that international lawyers are saying international law is dead. So in this context, if you are arguing anti-terror laws exist in other countries, so therefore in Sri Lanka also we have to bring anti-terror laws, it does not make any sense, because the moral high ground of the West today does not exist anymore, simply because of what is happening in Palestine and then of course in Myanmar. So we don't have to follow the West, we don't have to follow other countries, we don't have to follow India. We need to think whether we need an anti-terror legislation here. And the argument of not only me, but also members of parliament, at least until they came to power, the sitting members of parliament, has been that we do not need an anti-terror legislation in Sri Lanka. So I hope you will all sign this petition. We will pressure the government to repeal the PTA and not pass a new anti-terror law. And on this back question, what I want to say is that this government came to power speaking of a clean country. Now also they are pushing a project called Clean Sri Lanka. But as Melanie Gunatilaka said before, we are not speaking, we are no longer speaking about the money which was stolen by Rajapaksas and the political elites and the business elites. We are speaking about coming out of the debt crisis, and the entire burden of the debt crisis seems to be on the ordinary people of the country. And a part of that project is only backed. So we are asking the government, you came to power on the votes of ordinary people. You did not come to power on the support of the business elite and the political elite. You came to power telling us, promising us that you will usher in a new political culture. So in that spirit, we are asking you to abolish VAT on essential items so that ordinary people can live a decent life in this country. Please sign the petition and please support our call to repeal the PTA and stand against all oppressive laws and abolish VAT on essential items. Thank you.